Whether you play ARK Ascended or ARK Evolved, taking advantage of overpowered abilities that some creatures have can make playing the game so much easier and way more fun. In this video, I'll cover the 30 best creature abilities in the game, and for the sake of this list, I'll strictly be talking about creatures that are in both ARK Ascended and ARK Evolved so that everybody can learn something. Without further ado, let's get into it. Up first, I have the radar mode that the Parasaur has. This is good for bases because it gives you a warning when any threat is nearby, and you're also able to take advantage of this ability to carry it around with something like a wyvern to go check the map for hidden Purlovias, Reapers, or Phoenixes if you're on Scorched Earth and you're trying to find it before the heat wave. That specifically makes taming a Phoenix so much easier because you can basically prepare a trap and the full tame before it even pops out of the ground. Looking for Purlovias and Reapers is a really good way to get some easy loot that people are trying to hide in PvP as well, so it's a great ability for both game modes. You're able to enable the warning through a radial menu, so it's pretty easy to set up as well. This ability, on top of it being very good in the early game for farming berries, makes it a must-tame creature when you play the game. Speaking of must-tame creatures, next up is the dung beetle, which is able to convert poop into fertilizer and oil passively. Putting poop in a dung beetle's inventory will allow you to convert it to fertilizer over time, and you do generate some oil as well. And in ASA, you can even turn on auto collection, which allows the dung beetle to basically grab all poop nearby without you having to manually put it in its inventory. In ASE, you do have to manually place the poop in its inventory, but it's not that bad because you can just force feed a Phiomia stimberries to produce a really high amount of poop. It's a much more efficient alternative to the compost bin, and the way you want to set this up is you basically put it in a cage and set it to wander so it can passively convert everything in its inventory while not getting in your way. You can access the dung beetle's inventory when it's in the cage without even opening the cage, which is convenient as well, and you want to pump as much weight as you can onto the dung beetle so it can carry more poop. It's worth noting that different sizes of poop do give you different amounts of oil and fertilizer. On screen now you can see the breakdown for all three types of poop and how much fertilizer and oil they give you. One really important ability in ARK is the RG's corpse harvesting buff that it gets whenever it harvests a corpse. Basically, if you're out and about and your Argentavis is low on HP because you're using it for every single task you have to do in the entire game, if you just harvest a couple of corpses with it after you kill stuff, you're going to heal up really quickly with the RG because you get boosted health regen for 30 seconds after you harvest a corpse. You can also use this on wild RGs if you drag over a corpse to the RG if it's low on HP, it'll heal right back up and then you can knock it out safely without having to worry about killing it. One really simple but super convenient ability in the game is the Otter's ability to carry multiple of the same type of artifact in his inventory at the same time. Besides the Otter, there's no way in the game to put multiple of the same artifact in any storage container at the same time. So if you want to stock up a bunch of artifacts to farm the boss fight a couple of times, it's going to be annoying because you're going to have to separate where you place these unless you put all of them on an Otter. This is also useful if you have the Otter as your shoulder pet when you do caving, because you can run the cave and just put all the artifacts you ever farm onto your Otter with zero concern. Speaking of the Otter, a couple of creatures in the game offer really excellent insulation, but the best two are the Dimetrodon and the Otter. For any insulating creature, if you level melee damage onto it, its insulation gets buffed and it does even more insulating. And in the case of the Dimetrodon and the Otter, you can actually level melee and use these to incubate your eggs. The Dimetrodon is the best from this because if you have a couple of Dimetrodons with a good amount of melee leveled into them, they're actually a complete substitute for air conditioners, and they don't cost you gas to keep going at all times. Otters also insulate your base and can insulate eggs, but they do this a lot worse than the Dimetrodon. They are good because they are smaller, so they're more space efficient, but per creature, the Otter is worse. Other creatures like the Basilosaurus are also really good for insulation, but in that case, the utility of the insulation is more to keep your rider insulated while you're in harsh conditions. The Stego is an amazing creature in ARK, but if you don't know how to take advantage of all three different plate modes, it's not nearly as good as it can be. The three modes it has are the hardened plate, heavy plate, and sharpened plate. First up, and the most useful mode by far, is the hardened plate, which gives you a damage reduction to incoming damage by 50%, which is insanely good. The Stego is already a ridiculously tanky creature, so adding a 50% damage reduction on top of that tankiness is just game changing. It's also worth noting that the hardened plate boosts your wood harvesting ability. For the heavy plate, the Stego is able to apply a slow effect when it attacks other things with a basic tail whip, and it gives you a thatch harvesting buff. And for the sharpened plate, it applies an armor penetration when attacking using the tail whip, and it's also really good for harvesting berries. In general, if you're in PvP or if you're in a situation like a boss fight where you're relying on a Stego's tankiness to beat the fight, the hardened plate is by far the best choice, and you can kind of switch between all three if you're trying to farm. The sharpened plate is never really going to give you that much utility in terms of actual fighting. The heavy plate can slow down certain stuff if you're trying to trap it, but generally speaking, unless you're farming something, you want to be on the hardened plate. At number 7, I have the stun immunity that the Basilosaurus, Tuzoteuthis, and Archelon have. All three of these creatures are immune to getting stunned by jellyfish and eels, so basically you'll never be in danger underwater because the most dangerous thing underwater is getting dismounted. The Archelon is of course only an ASA, but the other two are in both games, and the Basilosaurus and the Tuzoteuthis are also immune to getting grabbed by a Tuzo, which is the other way you can kind of get screwed underwater if you're not careful, so I recommend riding a Basilo or a Tuzo if you basically want to never die. One more thing to note is the Basilo does start taking damage over time when you're too deep in the water, but the Basilo has so much HP that this really doesn't matter that much, and it should never really be an issue. Speaking of the Basilo and the Tuzo, they also passively generate oil in their inventory over time, which can be a nice way to supplement oil in your base. The Basilosaurus can produce up to 20 in its inventory at a time, and the Tuzoteuthis can produce up to 70 oil at a time. It's not an insane amount, and going out with the Dunkleosteus or using oil pumps on the map is a better way to get oil. But if you do have a couple sitting around your base because you're breeding them or because you just don't want to put them away, the oil can be nice. Another creature that's really nice to have is the Achatina because it passively produces you cementing paste and organic polymer, which is really valuable. To put some numbers on it, the Achatina caps out at 100 cementing paste and produces one every 60 to 65 seconds, so you need to collect it out of its inventory regularly if you want it to produce the optimal amount of paste at all times. It also drops Achatina paste around itself as it moves around, as opposed to regular feces, which can be picked up and used as Achatina paste as well. The Gotcha is actually a creature that can automatically pick up this paste and hold it for you. If the Gotcha picks up your Achatina paste off the floor, it will automatically eat it over time if you don't have other structures on the Gotcha, but if you do have other structures, it is a great way to automatically farm cementing paste. You do need to have the Achatina on Wander for it to passively produce any of these resources, by the way. So you can either have a section of your base where they just wander around, or you can pull the dung beetle strategy again where you just put it in a cage. The Achatina also makes organic polymer in its inventory, which is produced at a rate of 2 per hour, and it also has a 3 times longer spoil timer in the Achatina's inventory compared to other locations. Organic polymer generally stacks to 10 and spoils in 30-minute increments, but in the Achatina's inventory, it spoils once every 90 minutes. So with this math broken down, you're basically netting 2 organic polymer per hour and 30 minutes. This ability of the Achatina to extend how long an organic polymer lasts before spoiling also makes it a great storage option for organic polymer if you need to wait a little bit before you use it. On screen now you can see a chart I found on the ARK wiki which pretty easily depicts how much organic polymer you're going to produce passively over time on an Achatina. Once you get to more than 1 stack of organic polymer, obviously twice as much is getting decayed at once, so you won't be able to get unlimited amounts of organic polymer at the same time on an Achatina. But if you go and pick it up off the Achatina and use it somewhat regularly, you should have around 15 every time you go check. Another really amazing farming ability is the dire bear's ability to farm insane amounts of honey very easily. When you regularly go to a beehive and you claim the honey out of the beehive, you usually get 5 honey. On top of getting the 5 honey, you'll also aggro the bees inside the hive, and it's a whole pain in the ass process. With the dire bear, however, you actually get 15 as opposed to 5, so you get 3 times as much. And on top of you getting 3 times as much, you also don't aggro the bees, so it's so much easier as well. Another creature from the Redwoods with a really good ability is the Megatherium and its Insect Killer buff. The Megatherium's Insect Killer buff gives you a 2.5x damage and a 75% resistance buff for 2 minutes after you kill any bug. This is most notably useful for killing the Aranios in the boss fights like the Broodmother and the Medusa fight, because then it buffs your entire army of Megatheriums and your army is incredibly strong. It also makes Megatheriums exceptional for any cave that it can fit inside of, because getting the buffs as you're going through the cave makes you unstoppable. One thing a lot of people don't know about the Megatherium is it actually also has a passive buff of 50% for damage to bugs, even if you don't have the Insect Killer buff active. It's just the best creature in the game at killing bugs, and while this is pretty niche, being really good against a couple bosses, being great in caves, and being amazing at farming chitin, which is perfect for crafting cementing paste in the late game, makes it a great creature. And while I'm not going to make an entire separate point on this because there's not much to be said here, the Beelzebufo is another great choice for killing bugs, because after killing the bugs, it automatically harvests cementing paste off the corpses as opposed to chitin, which is really efficient, especially for late game. A couple of other really good farmers that have an amazing ability are the Mosschops and the Therizino. I'm grouping these two together because they're similar in concept, but they are very different abilities. For the Therizino, you can actually upgrade a delicate or power harvesting on it in a radial menu, which basically makes it better at farming certain resources. On screen now you can see the division between which resources apply to which type of harvesting. So if you want to get a Theri that's, for example, really good at farming rare flowers, you want to get delicate harvesting leveled up. And if you want to get a Therizino that's great at getting wood, you upgrade power harvesting. The reason this is such a good ability is because this actually stacks on top of the melee damage buffs you can give to the Theri, so you're basically double buffing how good of a farmer it is. And this concept of double buffing how good the farmer is also applies to the Mosschops. For the Mosschops, instead of having 2 different categories, you can actually just upgrade how good it is at farming specific resources. On screen now you can see the long grocery list of resources the Mosschops can farm. I personally use this primarily for organic polymer farming, but there are a couple of really good resources on here that if you level up the Mosschops harvesting for, will make it the best harvester in the game for that resource. To upgrade these harvesting levels, you basically want to go to the radial menu like I mentioned before, and to actually unlock the levels, you just need to level up your creature. It doesn't eat into the actual statistics of your creature, you can still upgrade stats too. It's just an extra bonus upgrade you can give to these two creatures. On the topic of bonuses, the Karka stacks are maybe the best bonus any creature gets to power level in the entire game. When a Karka gets a kill, it basically gains a stack, and for every stack it gains, the Karka gets a boost to damage, speed, and health regen for a short time. This stacking ability caps at 100 stacks at a time, and at max stacks, this creature is ridiculously fast and insanely powerful. It's so good that it turns the Karka, which is not nearly as strong as a Giga regularly, into a creature that's faster, stronger, and just overall a better option than the Giga at max stacks. This is why Karkas are so good in environments like Element Veins and OSD defenses. Because you have an ample opportunity to get to the max stacks, the Karka is just the best option for those situations. Just make sure your stacks are always capped out, and if they're not, go around, find some easy creatures to kill, and then go back to whatever you were doing. It's going to be so much faster when the Karka's at that max stack level. The Oviraptor is another example of a creature that really relies on its ability to be worth taming. In both games, the Oviraptor buffs the egg-laying interval speed for creatures in its surrounding area. This is primarily useful when you're trying to get eggs for making kibble. In ASA though, it did get a buff and a nerf, which I'll briefly mention. The buff that it got is that it now automatically also picks up eggs in a nearby area, which is incredibly useful. This basically makes sure that the eggs that are getting laid by your kibble dinos are not just decaying on the floor. With that being said though, the trade-off in ASA is they added the bio grinder, so if you do have that DLC, the Oviraptor really isn't as necessary because the bio grinder honestly is just the easiest way to get kibble if you do have access to it and you use it effectively. Unlike the Oviraptor though, which may not be worth taming depending on your playthrough, you're always going to need a Yutyrannus. The Yutyrannus has both a Courage Roar and a Fear Roar, but for the sake of this video, I'll just talk about the Courage Roar because it's much more useful. The Yutyrannus Courage Roar is incredibly useful in PvE and can be useful in certain PvP environments as well. What it does is basically buffs all allied creatures in a nearby surrounding area by 25% in terms of damage output and 20% in terms of resistance. This is really useful in environments like boss fights and in PvP where, for example, you're trying to have a creature soak because the creatures in these situations are really strong, so giving them a sizable percentage buff to both damage and resistance goes a really long way. It's basically a must-bring creature for this Courage Roar ability for every boss fight ARK is released. Maybe calling it a must-bring is a bit dramatic, but it's pretty much always a good idea to have one. On the topic of boss fights, another ability that's really useful in certain boss fights is the Hydrated buff that the Spino, Shadowmane, and Tropical Crystal Wyvern can get. The Hydrated buff is basically a buff that a creature gets when it touches water, and it gives a buff to damage, speed, and health regeneration for 30 seconds after you touch water. This is insanely good for all the creatures it's available for. It makes the Spinos and Shadowmanes really good choices for boss fights with water in the arena, and it makes the Tropical Crystal Wyvern the fastest of the 3 Wyvern variants on that map by a mile, and it makes it a really good choice for traveling the entire map because it's so fast, as well as a really good choice for stealing eggs, because you can easily outspeed all the other Wyverns if you just keep using your wings to flap in the water to get the buff. I know the Tropical Crystal Wyvern isn't out yet because it comes out with Crystal Isles and the Shadowmane comes out with Genesis 2, but I figured I'd mention all 3 creatures because the Spino is in both games, and the other 2 will be in ARK Ascended at some point. Another cool water-based ability is the Baryonyx's ability to heal off raw fish meat incredibly fast. You can rapid heal your Baryonyx if you just force feed it a bunch of fish meat in its inventory. It'll gain health ridiculously quickly. It's one of the easiest creatures to heal while you're out and about because you can go into any lake, any river, kill a couple of fish, and then use the meat to heal your Baryonyx back to full pretty quickly. My 18th ability on the list is the lasso the Equus has. When you have an Equus, you basically have an optional ability to add a saddle to it if you want, and it's not totally mandatory. If you do decide to add the saddle to the Equus though, one ability you get that's completely unique to the Equus is the ability to craft lassos. A lasso is basically a way where you can drag unconscious creatures around the map without ruining the taming effectiveness to get it out of dangerous areas. Let's say for example you knock out a creature in the wasteland on extinction, or you knock out a Quetzal really high in the air and it falls in the water. The easiest way to get them out of those really difficult predicaments while they're unconscious is to get a lasso on an Equus and then drag the body out of the area it's in to a safer spot. This is a very underutilized mechanic for the Equus, and it's an incredibly convenient thing to be able to do. Before I get into DLC specific abilities, let's go through some general passive abilities that are incredibly useful. First is portable crafting stations on creatures. A couple of creatures in the game actually have portable crafting stations on their saddle, in their kit, or something like that, so here's the list. The RG, Castoroids, and Thorny Dragon all have a smithy on their saddle. The Equus has a mortar and pestle on its saddle, as well as the ability to craft the lasso, which is a unique item. The Phoenix and the Magmasaur from Genesis 1 on ARK Evolved act as refining forges, which can cook metal and meat at a faster rate than normal refining forges. And the Tropio from Crystal Isles, which yet again is only ARK Evolved for now but should be coming out soon, acts as a less efficient industrial grinder. Another really important thing to know about is pack buffs. A lot of creatures in both ARK Evolved and ARK Ascended benefit from having pack buffs, which are basically creatures that get benefited from having more of the same species of creature around them by getting an extra buff to damage and resistance up to a certain count, which is basically the max amount of creatures nearby that can buff you. For example, if you're in a pack buff, for example the Bison, which caps out at 6 I believe, each Bison in the pack will get a 5% buff to both damage and resistance for every single Bison in the pack up to 6, and then it caps out for all Bison at that buff rate. I'm not going to sit here and list off every single creature in the game that gets a pack buff. It's a very long list. On screen now you can see the list of every single creature that gets a pack buff, as well as how many creatures can actually go in the pack for each of these types of creatures and how much of a buff all of them get. Another really useful ability that a lot of creatures have are weight reductions on certain resources. This allows creatures to go out and have longer farming trips because they're not going to get encumbered nearly as fast when they're farming resources that you need for your base. It's especially useful when the resources you're farming are far away because it prevents a lot of back and forth, which wastes a ton of time. Instead of going through every single one and wasting 5 minutes of your time, I'm just going to link down below an entire article page that shows you every single weight reduction in the game. This list was last updated when ARK Evolved finished, so there's a couple of creatures missing, but it has almost everything. One more really useful general ability a lot of creatures have for farming is the auto harvesting feature. Especially in ARK Survival Ascended after the recent changes, creatures like the Anki, Doed, and Castoroids are really good to put on auto harvesting. The main use case for this, of course, is if you're farming solo, you can carry around one of these creatures, set it to auto harvest, and nowadays on ARK Survival Ascended especially, it'll just keep swinging and farming until you're encumbered. You can even set which specific resource you want your creature to auto harvest if it does harvest multiple resources. For the Anki, for example, you can set it to flint or metal, which is really convenient. In ARK Survival Evolved, it's still a decent thing to have turned on because solo farming is still a little bit easier when they are auto swinging, but your creature will stop auto harvesting in ARK Evolved after it's at half weight. This means eventually you will have to start dismounting and then getting onto the farmer, swinging manually, and then getting back on your flyer to carry around your creature for longer. But turning on auto harvesting not only helps you in your solo farming, but it also helps you if you want to leave a creature around your base and you want it to just get you some resources while you're not there in a passive way. Getting into the DLC abilities now, starting off strong with the Jerboa's weather forecasting. The Jerboa, on top of being a very cute and very easy to tame shoulder mount, is useful for its ability to warn you about upcoming weather events that Scorched Earth is known for. It can warn you about all 4 weather events, but the only one you really want to look out for is the Sandstorm event, because the other 3 really aren't that dangerous at all, and the Sandstorm is a complete pain in the ass. On screen now you can see what all 4 weather event visual representations look like from the Jerboa. Just look out for this one, or listen for this sound effect specifically. If you hear that high-pitched chirp, be ready for a sandstorm and be ready to not be able to fly at more than 1 mile an hour. Another Scorched Earth ability that's really useful is the Morellatops' water storage. You can go into a body of water with a Morellatops and then store water basically as a reservoir inside of your Morellatops. Not only is this helpful as drinking water on a map where water is really hard to come by sometimes, but you can also use the stored water to irrigate crops, which is incredibly useful in Scorched Earth. Obviously, eventually you're going to want a better alternative than a Morellatops to irrigate your crops, but if you're in the early or mid game and you're looking for a way to start getting a greenhouse going, a Morellatops is an okay choice. And if you're in the early game, it's pretty much impossible to actually drink all the water out of a Morellatops. It holds a lot. The last Scorched Earth creature on this list is the Phoenix for its ability to poop out silica pearls and sometimes rarely black pearls. Instead of doing regular pooping, Phoenixes poop out 15 silica pearls every time they poop, and can sometimes poop out 1 black pearl, which is rarer, but it's pretty cool. Especially on a map like Scorched Earth, where silica pearls and black pearls really are not that common to come by, this can come in handy. These, similar to the Achatina paste like I mentioned earlier in the video, can also be auto-picked up by gotchas. For Aberration, the only creatures I really want to talk about in terms of abilities are the light pets. These pets include the Bulbdog, Glowtail, Shinehorn, and Featherlight, and all 4 are incredibly useful for the same reason. You're able to put them on your shoulder, then use the clap emote, and they'll turn on their light, which holds off Nameless, reduces the resistance that Reapers have to incoming damage so you can deal with them easier in the wild. This also makes them exponentially easier to tame because they are really durable creatures, especially if you're not reducing the resistance. And the only trade-off for using these is Seekers getting targeted to you, but Seekers are a lot more easy to deal with than Nameless. One other creature you can use for the Reaper part of this list I just gave you is the Cosmos projectile attack. This also will inflict a temporary light debuff on Reapers. but you're really not going to get the same effect as light pets with a Cosmo. The Daedon and the Snow Owl are both incredibly good creatures because of their healing abilities. The Daedon's healing ability is more of a passive one where you can basically turn on healing in a nearby area, and then within a certain radius of the Daedon, everything in that area will be getting healed, and the only trade-off is that your Daedon eats a lot of food during this. The Snow Owl, on the other hand, is not so passive because you need to freeze creatures nearby you, and then basically hold them in your wings to heal them up while they're frozen. Both of these abilities are really good, and I do think they're similar enough to put in the same spot here. The reality is, especially in PvP, but even in PvE, you're going to do activities that get your creatures low on HP, and when your creatures have a lot of HP to heal back up, it's much easier to use a healing creature than to wait for a million years. The only alternative to these two creatures is the Tech Phase Pistol, but that's only in ARK Evolved. It's pretty inaccessible, and it's much more expensive than using a creature. That also only heals one creature at a time, and while it is better for portable healing, it's not better for overall healing. Similar to there being two healing creatures, there's also two really solid turret creatures in the game. The first, and by far the best turret creature, is the Dinosaur from ARK Extinction. The reason this is the best turret option is because it simply has better range, better DPS, and better stats overall than the Calicatherium, which is the other option. But the Calicatherium does have some nice perks as well, including its projectiles slowing down targets, as well as the ability to place Calicatherium turrets on top of Quetzal saddles, which is the only type of turret you can place on a Quetzal saddle in the game. Obviously, both of these are outshined by regular turrets, but if you're looking for a cost-effective base defense option, the Dinosaur is pretty hard to beat, and if you're looking for your Quetzal to be decked out, put some Calicatheriums on it, it's pretty cool. Maybe the best passive ability of any creature in the entire game is the Gotcha Crystal ability. Gotchas are excellent for automatic farming in two senses. First of all, they can produce crystals that generate a ton of different resources that you can see on screen now. All you need for this is some kind of structure that it can eat, and snow owl pellets from, well, snow owls. There's a lot of ways you can optimize gotcha farms. There's whole temperaments for them where they're basically happy or sad, and that affects how good the crystals are they give you and how often they give you crystals. I'm not going to get into that for this video because I don't want to double the length of the video, but just know that learning how to use gotchas, learning how to optimize everything for gotchas is a very, very valuable thing to learn. And it's also worth noting that actually getting really good gotchas that give you stuff like black pearls or element dust, which are in my opinion the best two by a decent margin, can be a very tedious process because really the best way you can do it is just going around and taming a ton of wild gotchas until you get one and then cloning it a million times. You can't even breed down the good traits you get. So for example, if you get an element dust gotcha, you can't even breed that down to get more element dust gotchas. So you're really gonna have to abuse the cloning chamber with this one. The other way the gotcha is really good is that it can automatically pick up dropped items from other creatures like Acatinas and Phoenixes like I mentioned earlier in the video. It's just an irreplaceable chain in the automatic farming link in ARK. And last, but certainly not least, I have the Ice Wyvern and to a lesser extent, the Winter Drakeling and the Vulture's ability to act as really good insulators for consumables. For Vulture specifically, it's pretty niche because the only consumable you can actually put on the Vulture is spoiled meat. But if you have it auto-harvest corpses around you, for example an Ovis corpse, it can preserve raw mutton or any other consumable you can actually get it to put in its inventory much better than your average creature. With that being said, the Vulture is pretty niche, and the best refrigerators in the entirety of ARK are the Ice Wyvern and the Winter Drakeling. These two, especially the Ice Wyvern, are the best because they both preserve items longer than refrigerators, have 300 slots compared to the 80 a regular fridge has, and accept more items in their inventory like wyvern milk that a fridge cannot accept. These two are just simply better than fridges in 2025. Well, that's my list of every single one of the best creature passive abilities inside of ARK. Thank you to my members for helping support the channel. The video I've been talking about is releasing in the next couple of days, so I'm really excited to share that. Hopefully this video helped you out, and if you enjoy learning about creatures in ARK, check out the video linked on screen now, which gives you one tip for every single creature in ARK history. I'll see you there. Peace!